Well, hello, good afternoon, and welcome again to Whisky and Cynicism. This is Desert Island Drams. My name is Simon Smith. I've got today, actually, a former employer of mine as well as a very good friend, and someone who needs no introduction, especially in the Scotch hospitality scene. Mr. Mike Aikman, who's behind, or part of the team, the partnership behind the Bramble bar, award-winning, and the associated Lucky Liquor and Last Word, as well as Bramble Whisky Co., Mothership, and various brands and things. So we've got a bit to cover today, but before we get to that, Mike, good to see you, mate. How are you, and what are you drinking?
Hi, mate. I'm good, very well. Can't complain. It's only 5 o'clock, so I thought I'd have a nice highball to start. I did consider having a dram, but it felt a little bit too early, so I thought I'd have a nice highball. That is with Loch Lomond 12, actually.
Nice. That's one of the best value drams on the market for me as well. It's delicious stuff, that.
Absolutely, yeah, fully agree, 100%.
Nice stuff, man. Well, I think there's a couple of things. There's obviously two huge things to cover based on kind of your career today. One side of which has been really based on mixed drinks, and one is, of course, specifically in whiskey. So to combine them in the first question, I guess, we see a lot these days of brands in particular, and a lot of the rhetoric and the culture around Scotch whiskey developing towards mixed drinks. It's okay to mix Scotch. We should be mixing Scotch, all that kind of thing, which you and I would obviously say we're in general in support of. But do you feel there's a bit of kind of shoehorning it? Is it being a bit forced and maybe forgetting first to an extent technique, but also Scotch's place in the world? Or is it just a natural progression, do you think?
It's an interesting question, actually, because I think there's two sides to every story, I guess. And this is one thing that the difference from when I started bartending, whenever that was 20 years ago, to now is vast in so many parts of that. But I think now there's definitely a greater understanding of the category. I think there's greater understanding of the use of Scotch within mixed drinks, which is great. I think there are, like a lot of things, there are guilty parties of shoehorning that we're definitely seeing. And I think, you can usually tell it feels quite inauthentic when you're seeing things that have been shoehorned in. But at the end of the day, I think it's all positive, because I think we're seeing Scotch whiskies in a better position than it's ever been. I think it's being used more in cocktails, which from my point of view as a Scotch fan, as a bartender, it is only a good thing. I think maybe, training younger bartenders in, what they should be using and why, is there a story behind it? Why are you using that Scotch? Is there, does it taste good? Is it affordable? There's lots of other elements to that, I guess. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting. We're seeing a lot of new mixed drinks that use Scotch, and I see them on menus now where I'm like, right, cool, or I did when there was bars to go into. But seeing drinks that you're like, oh, that's interesting, seeing different techniques and ingredients being used, and they won't always work. But by the same rationale, a drink that I've created that I think works, you could come in and go, I don't really get that. It doesn't work for me. It's palates and everyone's is different. But I think more importantly, we're now seeing those drinks that will pique your interest on menus, where for a lot of years there weren't really. If you did see a Scotch whiskey drink on the menu, it was the usual boring, Rob Roy, or, even down to flavors. Like you would see, and I talk about this a lot, it's like picking really obvious flavors that go with whiskey. So, vanilla, cherry, chocolate, all those things. And they do go, but it's not really that interesting to just see them mixed with Scotch. So it's using other things, more interesting things, whether that be techniques or ingredients or whatever. And now we're seeing obviously the simplicity of the highball making a comeback, which I'm all for as well, because it really is a great kind of showcase to let a whiskey shine through.
Yeah, the highball is such a nice blank canvas, because you're going to get, if it's just a whiskey inside, you're going to get the flavors of whatever whiskey coming through and kind of hitting off a slight bit of salinity and a bit of fruit or whatever. What kind of I find interesting is if you look at the rum world and tiki culture, you'll be using different rums, blends of rums in one drink, and rums specific to a flavor profile. sometimes I think that we're not really looking at that in Scotch. So throw this Scotch in there because I want to use Scotch, but people aren't thinking about cask, peat, age. And I mean, I, for one, always struggle to mix with Scotch, especially single malt. I always found it really difficult to play off such linear effect. I mean, what I'm drinking is a 10-year-old Highland Park from Glenmore, fully matured in Manzanilla.
Nice.
Now, it's really weird. There's a lot going on, and I was never the best mixologist, but I don't drink that, and not, I would struggle to really accentuate it in a mixed drink because it's got so much going on already. Have you found that sometimes which whiskey is being used and thought around Scotch in particular is being ignored in favor of progression of mixing it?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of that. I think it's partly down to a lack of inherent understanding on tasting whiskey and trying to pick those nuances, and that's difficult. It takes quite a palate to be able to take a whiskey and pick those nuances out and then match them with something and make that really interesting. So it's easier just to blank, insert X whiskey here. And yeah, it is quite frustrating, but I think you can quite often tell, if you know a whiskey and you see that it's been put with certain ingredients, you can kind of go, oh, well, I can see how that's going to work, because they've used, for example, a sherry cask whiskey, and then they've paired it with something that that goes with sherry. Whereas when you just see whatever it is, X blend that's then been put with a sweet vermouth and a bitters, you're like, well, I'm not going to try that because there hasn't been a thought process put behind that. But that's our jobs, I guess, to train people, both you from your position, me from my position, and anyone else who has that experience, is to try and kind of get that knowledge across. But yeah, there's definitely that. I mean, there's loads of other factors that come into play, if there's brand agreements and things like that, and then you see shoehorning going on, don't you, where it's just get this X brand on the menu, and there isn't really a massive thought process behind that. But I think mixing with single malts is, it is quite difficult. You do have to really spend time with it and work out the nuances and have a play with it and try different things. And an interesting thing I did recently, I've done a bit of drinks development for a couple of brands, Scotch whisky brands, and they were back to back with sort of 1 month to the next. And as part of that, I trialed some drinks with one of the whiskies, and there were two quite vastly different whiskies. So one was quite sherried, and one was more kind of Islay style, quite nice salinity, quite young. Without giving too much away. And what I found was that certain of the drinks that worked really well with the other one, with one, really didn't work with the other one. And obviously they were vastly different whiskies. But there was the occasional drink which worked quite well with both, but you had a preference for one or the other based on what your personal preference was. But there's definitely drinks that you try and you're like, how can that be that good on that brand and utterly terrible on that brand? And it's trial and error, I suppose, isn't it, in that respect?
Absolutely. I mean, even just to look to, as a random example, take that top line there. If you made the same drink on all of those whiskies, you'd be miles. One of my biggest challenges actually when I was working at the Last Word was to make a Craig Ellicky 13 drink. So it's such a definitive character to try and bring to the fore. You don't know what to throw at it. And it was back to the drawing board time and time again for me before I found kind of what worked. And even, on service, if someone said, can I get a peated, sour, old fashioned, whatever, I'd grab a Lafroig or a Port Charlotte, but I'd cut it almost 80% with a blend. Just to balance it. And that was the easiest way to kind of cheat my way through it, because if you tried to balance a heavily peated whiskey with nothing else, you end up with this drink that they think they want, but you taste it and you realize you probably actually don't.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. That's the art of the bartender, I suppose, isn't it? And there's lots of other factors to consider. The price of the whiskey they're using and what then working that out for, is that going to be a 12, 15, 20 pound cocktail, or are they going to bulk at that? What is their palate? What are they asking for? What they want, or are they asking for what they think you want to hear, or their date wants to hear, or their mate wants to hear? So it's trying to work out, you know, what their palate really is and what is going to work for them, and maybe tweaking it, you know. But it's an art form in itself, something I don't really do myself anymore, I have to say.
So there's probably a reason I'm not behind the stick anymore.
Me too, mate. Me too.
So to talk about whiskey, and that's obviously kind of the other thing I really want to cover. The Bramble Whiskey Co, which launched now, is that 2 or 3 years ago now?
Well, technically, our first bottling was 3 years ago, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, which was that really fascinating, youngish, heavily sherry peated Glenglasser, which was kind of barbecue smoke and sherry and lots of big things going on. But you're a massive whiskey fan. You've always been drinking it for, you know, your time in the industry is almost a couple of decades. You're very aware of the industry. You'll be very aware of the new releases coming in, both original and distillery bottlings and independents. So for you, bringing a new independent bottler in Bramble Whiskey Co to the market, where did you want to sit? What was the kind of ethos behind it, where you thought, this is where I want to do things differently, or specifically to our aims?
I don't think it was, it wasn't particularly anything that we wanted to do differently. The idea behind Bramble Whiskey Company was Jason and I think 2 years after we opened Bramble, which was 2006, I think we opened Bramble. So it was 2008, I think it was. We basically got this opportunity to buy a cask of whiskey, and we took the opportunity. And that sat. That actually is still sat. We haven't bottled that one yet, so that's the first one that we bought. We've then subsequently bought some other bottlings, and then once not bottlings, casks, and then once we had them, it was kind of after that we decided, well, hang on, we've got multiple now. You know, we kind of need an identity. Originally, we didn't really know what we were going to do with it. It's one of those things where you speak to a lot of people that are whiskey fans, and they're like, "Yeah, I'd love to own my own cask," because it's the dream, isn't it? I think for a lot of people. But we were fortunate in that at that time we had one bar. Shortly after that, we had two, and then ended up with three. So we kind of knew that we would have an opportunity, if nothing else, to be able to sell it through the bars. So originally, probably, I can't even remember, to be honest. We probably just planned to sell it through the bars. But as time's gone on and we've bought more, and it really was just because these opportunities fell into our laps. We got, we did some work with Glenglasser many years ago when they were bought over. And as part of that, they kind of said, well, look, if you're interested, we could sell you a couple of casks. We were like, yeah, awesome. So it really was just kind of an opportunity that came up. So, that's the idea behind it, was just to bottle some interesting things that we had a story behind, I guess. And we've not bought loads. We've got a few up our sleeves. We've got 2 launching this year. But I like to think that we've gone for quality over quantity. It's not really a thing. We're not seeing it as a massive money spinner. It's more just a thing that we did out of passion and out of something we were really. It's one of the things that Jason and I we're both big whiskey fans. It's one of the things we talk about and share drams and things like that, in much the same way I do with you. So we ended up getting one. We bought a cask for both of our sons were born in the same year, our first children. So we bought a cask to kind of celebrate that, which was, I think that was the Glenglasser that we've already done, actually. So yeah, that's the idea behind it, and bottling them when they're ready as well, which is why we've done it kind of arse backwards. So the Glenglasser was only between 6 and 7. And it was purely because we obviously get these samples intermittently, and we tasted it and we were like, wow, okay, that's good. And it is quite young, and it's ballsy and robust. But we thought that was a really interesting first one to go with. So yeah, it's just sitting on them, and we'll bottle them when we're ready. So the first one that we bought will be coming out this year when we can get it into bottles, but we're having issues with the distillery at the moment. But yeah, there's not it's not a big, we don't have like a big brand story behind it. It really is just a thing that we had these opportunities, so we took them, and now, we're constantly looking for more. But we've also had quite a lot of opportunities to buy casks that we've turned down because they didn't really excite us, to be quite honest with you.
I think it is interesting that you say the cast and excite us, because to me, that Glasser was definitely something off the wall and interesting. And the North British, of course, bottling such a young grain as an independent bottler is unusual. A lot of them tend to come out, even into their 20s, and with that really heavy char on it. It was, to have kind of that much punch from a grain at 5 years old was certainly, to my palate, delicious, but also interesting. So, do you want to keep kind of going down that route, always being something different? Are you going to try and avoid a 10-year-old Caligula, for example, because everyone's bottling 10-year-old refill American oak Caligulas?
I think the interesting thing with the grain thing is generally, I think grain's amazing older, sort of 20 plus, between 20 and 30. That's generally the kind of sweet point. Whereas for me, sort of single malts, quite often 12 to 15 is the sweet spot. But that we tasted that grain and we were just like, wow, that's absolutely stunning. I'd happily drink that. And also, we had kind of tasted it and thought, well, actually, that would be great in cocktails and mixed drinks. And because it is grain and it's young, it wasn't too expensive. So we thought, well, actually, if we can get that out, people could drink that. It's affordable to drink it in cocktails. So I think that was a factor for that one as well for us. Going forward, I think, yes, it has to be interesting. We don't want to bottle something that there's already too much of on the market or that's boring. It has to be interesting. Otherwise, what's your USP? There's loads of people out there that'll just bottle whatever they can get their hands on. But again, I think you can kind of tell that when you taste these, you're a bit like, they got this opportunity to buy it. They've just taken it. They're not really bothered about the quality of it. I think you're seeing that less and less with independent bottlers, but it's a really tough market now. Everything's that bit more expensive. Everyone wants to buy it. There's not enough whiskey to go around, it seems. But yeah, for us, I think doing things that are a wee bit interesting are definitely the way we want to do it. Whether that be a cask or a cask finish or something that's not what you would expect from that distillery, I guess, is something else, which is the unique nature of single casks, isn't it? And that's kind of what people that buy single cask whiskey are quite often looking for, is it's something out with the norm, and that could be just out with the norm from that distillery. So I think that's one of the things we found quite interesting about that.
I think that definitely reflects the whiskey nerd in you, and certainly why I'm interested in it is that you see, when you look at a spec on a cask, if it does take you somewhere outside of what you've experienced, as for me, so buying a bottle, as such. But I guess you're putting the same thinking towards selecting the cask. That's different. That's interesting.
Yeah, I guess so. And it's something we want to be proud of it, and we want people to say, oh, that's interesting. The flip side of that is that, things like that first Glenglassaugh bottling, I don't think everyone loved it. I think there were some people that were like, whoa, that is an absolute mouthful. And that's okay. I would rather have, a 50-50 split or whatever the split is of people going, yeah, I love it, to it's not for me, I don't like it, than just producing a really meh cask that everyone's like, yeah, it's all right,
Yeah. There's not much interest in beige whiskey,
No, but there's plenty out there that sell shit tons. So
yeah, of course.
There is enough interest of that, but it doesn't interest myself or Jace, I don't think, and or the people that work for us. They want something interesting to be able to sell over the bars at Bramble and Lucky Liquor and from Mothership web shop and stuff like that. So I think that's a big part of what we do as well, is, and when you worked at Last Word, it was the same. It was like, well, look, we've got this, it's not what you expect. What do you think? And getting their opinion and just going with something really standard that there's a million of in the market already is not really going to work for anyone, I don't think.
Yeah, making a big fanfare about releasing a really common cask type over a bar isn't quite the same, is it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, it's this single cask and it's exclusive to us. Yeah, but does it taste good? And is it affordable for that matter as well? Because this is the other, rant that I'm sure we'll get to is it's all well and good having this single cask or this unique bottling, but if it's not affordable for your punters or for the people you're aiming it for, then what's the point?
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you what annoys you most about the industry, so should we segue into that quite quickly?
How long have you got?
Yeah, I mean,
no.
Whenever I penned that question, I kind of considered why I'm asking it, and with you, I did think it might be a long one.
Do you know what? There's lots that I love about the industry, but for anyone that's been in it a great length of time, I think there's probably a lot that annoys them as well. But I just don't see the point in ranting about the same things as a lot of other people rant, because there are things that are really annoying. I guess the things that probably one of my biggest bugbears that I've come across a bit recently is people that I'm not going to rant about flippers and collectors and all that kind of stuff, because I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that it annoys more than me. But I've heard of a lot of people recently that that flip and collect and whatnot, but they don't drink it, and that really frustrates me. I think there's a lot of people out there that do a bit of both. There's some people that, but if you are literally only doing it as a showpiece or to make money out of, then that's not cool. There are a lot of bottles out there that won't get opened. That's just inevitable. But the more people like that out there, I just find that really frustrating. Then there's all the usual kind of things that you can get annoyed about, the bullshit marketing from some brands, the ignorance, the snobbery, the geekery. There's lots of things like that, but it just is what it is. And I think the only other thing that is a little bit frustrating at the moment is the increase in prices that we're seeing. Now, I think part of that is it's inevitable. I think for a long time, Scotch whisky was massively undervalued. I mean, to think back to sort of early days of my bartending career, you were buying a 12, 15-year-old single malt for the same price as a flavoured vodka quite often, maybe even more so. And actually, when you think about the production that goes into it and the time that it takes, it's fucking mind-blowing that was ever the case. So I think there was always going to be an increase. But I think even in the last sort of year to 2 years, we've seen the price hike again, and it just feels like it's getting silly now. You're seeing really kind of whiskies that aren't particularly old. If you're seeing something that's been aged 20, 30 years, you're going to have to pay for that. That's the nature of it. But to see, and particularly from distilleries, so they're not independent bottlers, so they're not having to pay someone else for that. That's their costs are their base costs, their production and whatever else. So I think there is a bit of greed in that respect, where some bottlers are seeing the price, or some distilleries, bottlers, whoever it is, seeing the prices that are being charged and making up the price now, and pricing out a lot of regular whiskey drinkers to the extent that I think we're seeing some whiskey drinkers moving on to other spirit categories, and that's quite sad. So one of the things that we touched on very briefly at the start actually was this kind of idea of affordability, and this is something that I think is really interesting, is looking at bottlings on the market that are good value. They're great quality whiskey, and they're a good price. And I'm sure we could sit and name 20 that we would agree on. And that's an interesting thing to do at the moment as well, because it's all well and good just hunting all these limited editions and weird finishes and all that, but alongside that, I always have some standard bottlings, if you like, open in the house, because I think there's something really nice about that as well, knowing that is a standard available whiskey at an approachable price. There's consistency. There's a lot of good things about it as well. So I think, yeah, that's maybe one of the good things that's happened from the price changes that we're seeing, the price increases that we're seeing, is that maybe I've kind of refocused a little bit, and now I'm looking at, you know, what can I get that's good value, that's affordable, that I'll happily like drink, you know, on its own. Not something that I just want to hide in a highball, something that I'll happily sit, you know, it's a 40, 50 quid bottle, whatever it is. And you're like, yeah, that's great. So yeah, I think they're my frustrations, but I've also tried to kind of put a positive spin on it for once, if you like.
I think the pricing thing's so interesting to me. You know, I stand in drink longer as I did yesterday for, you know, kind of 8 hours and look around, and, you know, I'm familiar with the shop, but you still kind of find it interesting. But you look at things and you think, okay, that's a 12-year-old sherry cask, that's 42 quid. And then you look at the gin shelf and half the stuff on there is the same price. And you kind of, so, I mean, there is this kind of, there is certainly an expense in Scotch whiskey, more than we've ever seen. But when you look at it in the market against other stuff, you kind of think, well, when you, as you say, when you go into the production of it, 12 years in an expensive cask or gin, so we're still talking about flavored vodka. You know, it's kind of mad to think that, okay, they're the same. Then there's this other side of whiskey whereby a 3-year-old can be 3 times that price because of the secondary market pushing it up. It seems that we're at this point where that we're not finding quite a level on prices yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. But I think that greed thing that I was talking about, that you know, there's not, I don't think there's a massive amount of it, but there is definitely an element of that. But I think you're seeing a lot more of that in the gin industry, and it's because that bar's been set, and it is, if you want to premiumize yourself, you are 35, 40 quid, whatever it is. And there's a lot of people that are just like, well, everyone else is doing it, so let's charge that. We want to be seen as good as them, so let's just charge that. And, you know, anyone that knows much about the production of gin knows that, you know, even having it contract made, it's not costing you that much, you know. So unless you're putting it in a diamond encrusted bottle, which I'm sure there is something out there.
It should really exist.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think it's a difficult one to kind of compare it to that, because that's such a booming market, although I suppose so Scotch. So there's an argument there. But yeah, I think there's more piss taking goes on in the gin world than the Scotch world. So yeah, I suppose definitely. That's another positive to take out of the Scotch industry, is that actually gin's worse.
We're not quite paying for the sea glass in the bottle yet.
No.
But I mean, it's interesting as well, because in whiskey, you take something like Glenmorangie Elgin Classic, which to me is a great pouring every day, and it probably sits about 20 odd quid in the supermarket. And in Scotch, especially, people will see that as being inherently bad because it's cheap.
Yeah, 100%.
People want to pay for it because that means it must be good.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think Glenmorangie are a great example of people that are putting out good quality drams at reasonable prices. Even some of the, I can't remember, what's the Madeira one? It's their Distiller's Selection.
Yeah,
Selection,
I don't know.
Something like that.
Master Select something, yeah.
Yeah, and they did that Calvados one, the cider cask one, sorry, and then something else, and you know, they're well priced, I think, and actually some of them are cracking drams. The Madeira one I absolutely loved, and I can't remember what it cost, but it was like 65 quid or something. And liquid versus price for me was spectacular. I thought it was amazing. So when you look at their kind of standard blends that you do see in the supermarket, and I think it is a shame because they are in all the supermarkets and they are so cheap, that I think there is a lot of that kind of snobbery, is like, oh, Glenmorangie shit. It's not. Some of the stuff they put out is great, and it's very, very well priced, I think, a lot of it. So they're a good example of how, you know, a distillery is doing it for me.
Exactly, yeah, and by no means one of the huge players anyway, and still manages to keep their prices down.
Yeah, which proves it can be done.
Well, exactly. To change tact a little bit, I mean, we've all got kind of some experiences that kind of are memorable and interesting and different in the whiskey and drinks world. You probably as many as anybody. Have you got a favorite drinks or whiskey kind of memory from your time?
It was a tough one, actually, when I was thinking about that. It would have to be, I've got a group of friends from back from school days that I still hang out with pretty regularly. Well, not currently. And so for my 40th, one of my best friends who's not in the trade, but he's turned into a massive whiskey geek. And we have exactly the same birthday. So we decided to all go with the rest of the boys to Islay for a few days for our 40th birthdays. So that'll be 3 years ago this year. I know I don't look it. So yeah, that's probably my it wasn't one particular thing about it. It was just getting to go spend a weekend with the boys. We're all in our 40s. Most of us have got wives and children, so we don't get to do it as much as we used to. So just getting to go, we did some distillery tours. It was just great. The whole experience was just awesome. So that was a real kind of highlight for me, a real memorable one.
It's funny. I mean, so many times, I think this is episode 25 or something, and so many times that question's come back to, or the answers to that question's come back to Islay for some people. It's such a special place, and I think I'd be hard pressed to go past my stag do for pretty much the exact reasons you've just listed there. It's quite an amazing place and a great place to go with a like-minded group of people, and I, for one, can't wait to get back there.
Yeah, same. And the funny thing is that I'm not the biggest Islay whiskey fan. It's not that I don't like it, but it probably doesn't sit anywhere above anywhere else, particularly from a whiskey perspective. But there's something really unique about it. I just think it's an incredible place. The people are amazing, and just having all of those iconic distilleries in such a small space, and it being an island as well. It's an incredible place. To be honest, one of my other main kind of whiskey memories, I guess, that I did consider was Islay as well, and it was probably my moment where I realised how much I was into whiskey when I got taken over there by Bowmore. Actually, it was Ian McLaren and Alan Wardrop when they both worked for them. So I was a reasonably fresh-faced bartender at this point. I think I don't even know what year it was. It was when I first met Frank from the Pot Still, actually, and he went running into the sea one morning, and it was just incredible. But again, it was a great kind of eye-opening moment for me. And it was, I've drunk whiskey when I was too young to drink. I drank whiskey and iron brew. That was with my best mate that I was talking about earlier that's not in the trade. That was our carry out of choice. And it's been born from my dad's a big whiskey fan. I mean, not as much as me these days, but he always had a dram. He always had drams in the house. So I was kind of brought up with it in that respect. Then I went through the whole whiskey iron brew thing. Then I kind of fell away from it a little bit, and it wasn't until I started bartending. I started bartending when I was 21, and that's when I got into it again. And I was like, oh, hang on, there's more to it than, drinking Bells and iron brew and whatever else it was I was drinking. So yeah, Islay's something else.
Yeah, I don't think you properly are in the whiskey world until you've seen Frank Murphy swimming off. It's Port Charlotte actually when I was there, with Gordie Hughes holding a towel up for him like a bellhop.
Brilliant.
Let's get to the crux of it then. This should be an interesting one. So Mike, if you were to be marooned on a desert island, what would be the 3 drams you take with you?
Well, obviously I found out about this question in advance, and I've seen some of the other ones, so I did start thinking about it, and now it's so difficult. Straight away, I knew my number one. My number one is I don't have it here. Is Craigellachie, which is debatably my favourite distillery, as you know. They did a single cask bottling for the Craigellachie Hotel, 21-year-old, and it's my favourite dram. It's
exceptional.
My desert island dram, just so good. I don't really think I've tasted any bad Craigellachie's, to be honest. I think what they do is great, but at that age, it's just really funky, and it's amazing. I've been fortunate enough, I did a little bit of work with them a few years back, so I've been fortunate enough to try it on several different occasions in several different places, and it's just spectacular. I had a bottle of it and shared it with mates, and no one it didn't have the same effect on everyone else as it did me, but that's, it's personal preference, isn't it? But yeah, that's a special dram to me. So that was a given. I had my number one kind of right. That's number one. Number two is probably Bowmore Dawn. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do actually.
Their port cask finished Bowmore from the, God, when would that be? Late 90s, early 2000s? I don't know when that was out. But when I worked at Oloroso many years ago, we used to sell quite a lot of it, and that was kind of my introduction to that. And then kind of when it went full circle, I got married in Italy a few years back, and now Bowmore Dawn's been gone for yon time, and I'd never saved a bottle. But we got married in Italy, and I happened across this little booze shop. When was that? I should really remember when I got married, 2015. So 6 years ago now. And I found a bottle of old style Bowmore Dawn for, I think it was like 60 euros or something. So I've managed to squirrel away a bottle, which I've not opened yet. I'm saving it for a special occasion. But yeah, that kind of brings it full circle a little bit. And to be honest, part of that is memory, as is a lot of whiskey. You know, it's personal experience and memories. And maybe when I taste that, it won't be as good as I think, because it's been years since I've tried it, because it's not readily available. You don't see it anymore, and it's hundreds of pounds to buy it at auction. So I felt pretty lucky to be able to pick up a bottle. So yeah, that was my second one. The third dram, God, I had like a list, and I was just like scoring through them. I've gone with a grain because I think grain's really underrated. And the grain I picked is one that Georgie Bell, actually, when she worked at Scotch Malt Whisky Society, recommended this. And I had to go and look it up because, again, she recommended it. I tried it at the society, and then I bought a bottle to bring home, which didn't last very long. So I had to look it up. It was a 19-year-old Invergordon, which I actually thought was a bit younger than I thought it was. From the time I remembered it being late 20s, but apparently it was only 19-year-old from 1993. I think it was called All Day American Breakfast. It was spectacular. And at that point, I definitely didn't rate grain whiskey. I hadn't tried an awful lot of grain whiskey, and I hadn't tried a lot of single cask grain whiskey. I hadn't tried a lot of older grain whiskey. And that was like a wow moment for me. So, I've probably drank quite a lot of grain whiskey. Again, with the affordability thing, you can still buy, early 20s grain whiskey for decent sums of money. And during the initial kind of phase of my buying whiskey at auction, nobody bought grain. So I bought quite a lot of stuff at auction in the early doors before it went mental. So I've got a nice little stash of drinking, grain whiskies, basically off the back of that. And it was amazing. I'd love to get another bottle of it, but no chance.
Nice.
They were my three. I thought it'd be a nice, I have to have one from Islay. I have to have one from Craigellachie for the reasons kind of mentioned before. And I thought, well, what am I missing in my three? And if you're stranded on a desert island, you want a nice balance. So I've got peat and port cask. I've got a funky single cask, meaty, kind of slightly sherry, salty thing from Craigellachie. And then I've got this really nice grain whiskey it tasted like kind of maple syrup and pancakes and bacon. And it was, just great. So I thought that's covering all of my bases if I'm on a desert island. So.
Nice. Quite a lot of balance. I kind of always like it how these things come back to either a point of discovery on someone's whiskey journey or simply just a sentimental kind of memory situation, whether it be a first dram or, as you say, a first grain or a first peat, or, everyone kind of has these, epiphanic moments along the way that they keep harking back to, which is kind of lovely that we're not just basing it on rarity and money.
Yeah. And I think that's the difference between true whiskey aficionados and people that do it for show or whatever. I don't know what their rationale is, but I think, if you're really into it, then you'll be able to answer it with, quantify it with reasoning behind it. And I think that's more meaningful than because it cost, I've tried whiskies that are exceptionally old. I've tried Craig Elkies that are a shitload older than that, but that one was by far and away my favorite. It's not about that. It's not about money. It's about, and also flavor. That is number one. That's the reason we drink whiskey, right? Because if we were just drinking to get pissed or for the effect or for show or whatever, you drink vodka or, I don't know, gin or something. But the reason we drink whiskey, the reason you're into whiskey is flavor.
Because it's delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the I've been lucky enough to try some very old and very rare stuff along the way. People say, "What was it like?" And I haven't a fucking clue, actually. Asked me, a 1940 something, and you went, "Oh, that's delicious. What's that? Cool." And then you forget about it. Whereas the first time you try like a staple or a favorite or something that really has memorable effects, that stays with you. You can smell it in your sleep and you'll know what it is. Whereas some of the really rare stuff you try 10 mils of in passing, it comes and it goes.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the same lasting thing, which I think is exactly what you say. If you're really into it, it's the stuff that sticks with you, whether that's a supermarket blend or a single cask Craig Elkie.
Yeah. I think it's tempered a little bit for me with if I know that something's exceptionally expensive, if it's crazy money, I expect that to knock me on my arse. I expect it to be the best dram ever if it costs the most of everything that I've tried. So almost that kind of ruins the experience for me a little bit because I'm expecting too much and it's almost never going to live up to that, So I think, again, it's that whole affordability thing. It's is it amazing? And can I afford to buy another bottle? Because if it is, then great. And there's shitloads of bottlings out there that I think do, fit in that category. I've been lucky enough with being a whiskey fan and owning bars and having lots of friends that are into whiskey, to try loads of interesting things. And I think it's a nice little circle you get into where when you're into whiskey and you chat to other people about it, it's whether it's yourself or my mate who's a policeman or Arthur or Jace or Craig Harper, we've got a big group WhatsApp thing and we just share drams, so it's just, I feel quite lucky to have such a big group of friends that are into it that have shared, all of these special drams, and it's quite addictive in that respect. And that's one of the things that I love about it, the whiskey industry and the hospitality industry in general, is this kind of family, I guess, that do share drams and, enjoy each other's company and chat shit. And yeah.
I guess what makes a really good dram is it not only being delicious, but me being more than happy to pour 50 mils of it for me and my mates.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Would I rather have that with some good chat, or would I rather have 10 mils of something incredibly rare and expensive in a stuffy environment? No contest.
Absolutely. Every day of the week. Well, that's a pretty good note to conclude on, mate. So it's been lovely to catch up with you as ever. And really, really hoping we can get a dram in person soon enough.
Fingers crossed.
Oh,
thanks for inviting me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Always good to see you. Slange, mate.
Cheers. Slange.